Today is April 17th, 2018. I'm Cameron Wood here with Rupert Twink Starr at the Thurber Towers in Columbus, Ohio. Mr. Starr, can you please say and spell your name for me?
Spell my name,
Yeah.
Rupert. Middle initial is D like dog. And the last name is Starr, Starr, 2 R's.
Thank you. But you go by Twink regularly.
Yes, I do. I'm fifth in my family to be nicknamed Twink because most of us went to Ohio University and were Delta Tau Delta fraternity.
How did you come up with, how did your family get the nickname Twink?
Because the last name's Starr. And little kids say, "Oh, twinkle, twinkle, little star," nursery rhyme. And it's distinctive. It makes a great real estate sign. I can put a star sign on my business cards have a star on them. And it's a name that is different and therefore more easily remembered and great for a salesman.
Where and when were you born?
I was born in a little town of Mount Sterling, 30 miles southwest of Columbus, and 1,200 population. It was a retired farmer's town, more or less, in a bedroom community for Columbus. And my father was the village dentist. My mother was the high school, senior class high school, that taught a little bit of everything that was required: world history, French, home economics, and was also the home of John W. Bricker, governor and senator of Ohio, and also of John W. Galbraith, sportsman, owner of the Pittsburgh Pirates, the Darby Dan horse farm where he raised thoroughbred horses. His horses have won the Kentucky Derby, the Pimlico, and his first wife was introduced. They were college friends and fraternity brothers of my father, my uncle, and so as a result, I had I had a hard time getting a job after college, after the Army. At John Galbraith, I walked in his office, and here I had all these qualifications. He had to take me, but it was very interesting that his sort of salesman he was. In college, I dated his daughter, but I didn't want to father-in-law like him. He'd be so exacting and so demanding to be like him, and he was the best salesman I ever knew. And but so I didn't marry her. Later I found out I couldn't have anyhow. But I sold then. He said I was selling soap for Procter and Gamble, as in Dayton, Mr. Procter and Gamble for Dayton, and he saw him at Mount Sterling at an alumni banquet, and he says, "Don't waste your time. You come to Columbus, I'll make you five times what you're making there. So you have to wait 10, 20 years to be Procter and Gamble president and make the money that I'm going to make you in the next year." And sure enough, he did. And that gave me all the not being and being a bachelor, and that's another story. But Twink Starr, you asked about, that has been distinctive. I know when I was initiated in Athens, Ohio, at Ohio University, the telephone rang and they said, "Twink Starr on the horn," and there were 3 Twink Starrs sitting in the living room. But it's been a great asset, both to it's talking about history. I am proud of the fact that I am one of the first, if not the first, for the Smithsonian Institution in Washington to start their historical interviews and so forth. And my cousin was a full colonel, just retired from the military, from the Pentagon, and sure enough, when we had a trip to a trip sponsored by Westerville, in my case, I forget what you call that, but we went over to see the New World War Memorial, and we were met by my cousin. So I thought it was pretty important, and he apparently showed me where in the steps of one of the entranceway was Kilroy, showing us that Kilroy was here before anybody. If you remember Kilroy.
Yeah.
The kids today don't know what I'm talking about.
Was that an honor flight?
Honor flight from Westville, that's the word.
Okay.
And that was outstanding. And there were 85 of us and 85 of volunteers to look after us. And it was, when we came back to Port Columbus, the newspaper said there are 1,000 people waiting for us, which, I mean, that's very emotional. It is quite an honor. But you can tell I am emotional, and I start talking about my family, or I start talking about World War and death, and I keep thinking, well, I'm 95 years old. How soon is I going to see that Grim Reaper? If I don't see anybody wearing black, I keep away from him.
Well, let's start out with something a little more happy. What was it like growing up in Mount Sterling?
Well, it was wonderful, because we knew everybody, and my roommates, my classmates rather, were Brickers and Galbers, and they meant nothing to me. But as far as being better than I was, or richer than I was, my father died when I was 10, and my mother was a school teacher, senior class, taught world history, French, home economics, and it was everybody knew everybody, and the fact that if I did something wrong, my mother heard about it right quick. And I remember an interesting story is the fact that walking up the street, which was about 4 blocks, at the filling station, and it was the old pump where you had to pump the gas into the tank on top, and then put your hose in the car, and then release it, and the gravity paid it down. And that was showing how old I am. But my kids were chewing bubble gum and blowing bubbles, and I didn't have a penny, so I went in to the man who had the bubble gum machine, and I said, I lost my penny. And so he gave me a penny and got a bubble gum. Well, I got home, and Mother says, where'd you get the penny for your bubble gum? And I told her, and she says, here's a penny. You get back there right now, and you apologize to that man and hand him that penny, and let you tell me that was the hardest thing to do, to admit that I had lied. And I must say, I'm not a George Washington, but I didn't cut down a cherry tree, but I swear I've never lied since. And I found that I was explained by my mother that you tell the truth, and you don't have to worry about remembering what you said, because you'll tell the truth again. But if you lie, you can't remember what lie you told. I says, well, that sounds kind of interesting. So that was one of my wonderful mother who raised 3 boys and put us all through college and won a doctor. And so that was small town, was what it was like in a small town.
What did you like? Were there things you were good at school when you were growing up? What kind of things were you interested in?
Well, I was interested in making good grades, and I had a mother and father, college education, Middle University, college sweethearts. I had aunts and uncles. I had grandparents. They were all college educated. Now, my grandfather, Johnson, my mother's father, was a doctor from Nelsonville and went to a prestigious school out on the East Coast. And my grandmother, Lydia Johnson, went to a finishing school in Virginia, so that education was very important to our family. And my father, my uncle, my aunt, and then my parents and my 3 brothers, 2 brothers and me, the 3 of us, and their wives were all college educated. And my partner was was educated, college educated, and fraternity man as well. So I've always tried to stress to the young kids, education, make you a happy man, keep you out of poverty if you do yourself the way you know you can do.
So it was in college that you started ROTC, right?
Correct. I graduated from high school in 1940, and the war in Europe was already on, and I knew that we would follow, and we would join British England and France in the war, and so I felt it was inevitable, and so did the university, and every college, every fraternity, no, every freshman boy that came in that were required to take the obstacle course and of course in military training, and I joined the ROTC particularly, and I enlisted, in other words, to be a corporal in 1940. So I enlisted, I wasn't drafted, and at that time they were starting to draft people, but I had 3 years and a half at Ohio University when the Battle of the Bulge started, and they no longer could wait for training, and they needed bodies with guns to overcome the Germans. And so that's another story.
Mm-hmm. Did you have any, is there a history of military service in your family?
Captain George Starr in the Revolutionary War was the captain was a quartermaster officer for, I think, the certain states in the East. And I always am amazed, and I wanted very much to become a captain like he. And I got to be a first lieutenant, but I didn't stay in the war long enough. I went, when I first got in and was assigned, when I had volunteered after college, they called us in to assign us a division. I was to go to the 106th Infantry Division as a combat lieutenant on charge of a platoon of 35 men. But when they saw I had 2.5 years of business administration, they said, "No, we need you in headquarters." So they put me in the States here into personnel officer of 15,000 men, and I made sure that I had 20 sergeants under me, as they said. So but then we were called overseas, and so I was then made a liaison officer between the division and my 422nd Infantry, and I had in the States I'd gotten to know Lieutenant Major General Alan Jones and George Deschanel of the regiment, and so they felt that I qualified very well to be the liaison when the artillery shot off the telephone lines. That the Signal Corps at that time, the Signal Corps put out miles of telephone lines. Today, everyone's got a walkie-talkie, but at that time, then the only message would have to be me going from regiment to division and message and vice versa. And that's how I got the Bronze Star, was because they had officers call it 422nd and said, "We're surrounded, we're down to no ammunition, or getting out of food, and you have to get back and get word to the division that we are surrounded, we can't get out, and we're fighting them off, but they're going around us." And so we had 3 divisions in the line, and they had 8. Then they brought in 10 more, but that's what made the Battle of the Bulge, which was the largest Battle of the Bulge, and the finish war, because Hitler was desperate. He used his own 2 armored SS troops to his own protection. He was down to 3 rounds of ammunition to rifleman, and his big, gorgeous Tiger tanks were stuck out of diesel fuel. And that's a great story as to how we could kill a Tiger, because the Germans, notoriously great engineers, it's just some of the cars, for example. But it took 3 Shermans to kill a Tiger. But we had Rosie the Riveter bringing out a Tiger tank, a Sherman tank every day, one a day. Therefore, I guess, and the point is, those Tigers, they would be stuck, and maybe they would run a little bit, but they were saving their diesel fuel. But 2 of the Shermans would get over on one side, and so that the big turret would swing around. And our turret, we had 77 millimeter tank guns. They had 80 millimeter. They outdid us all mechanically, but we had the brains and the independence that they didn't have. But the point is that the two our tanks, Shermans, attracting the turret turned around. The other Sherman would come right up to the tank. The hood would stop open, and a soldier would get out with a flamethrower and burn up the guys in the Tiger tank. They'd throw open the top and jump out and run all aflame with their clothes all afire, and then would shoot them. And so it was an ingenious way of beating a Tiger.
So, were you with the 106th at that time?
I was 106th at that time, and I was the liaison officer. And the way I got this Bronze Star, the red one here on the bottom, first of all, the American flag, and I have American flag flying on my car, the driver's side, and a POW on the side. And I always wear American flag whenever I wear a jacket. And I have next the combat infantry badge. And if you'll see a general who's been in the infantry, he'll have maybe star, 2 stars on his shoulder, or maybe even a lieutenant general with 3 stars. But leading all of that glitz he'll have on the top will be the combat infantry badge. More proud of that than anything. And then the next I have is a Bronze Star, which was for courage under fire, and that's when I was taking the liaison message back and forth. And at night, I would walk behind the Germans going up the street, and when they would come down, I would go over into the ditch and to evade them. And the one time I stepped into a foxhole and I immediately had a cigarette go out, and Hans, and I was in the foxhole 4x4 with a German soldier, but he was as scared as I was, and needless to say, I got the hell out of that foxhole in a hurry. But at that time, the reason I was doing this was because the division, Saint-Vith, Belgium, Saint-Vith, if you like, the French, was being surrounded and attacked, and they wanted the regiments, 2 regiments, the 422nd, 423rd, to come back and protect them, and they didn't want the division to be captured. That would just ruin the whole thing. But I went back then to that time, and the 7th Armored Division was there, and I joined the 7th Armored, got shot at tremendously, broad daylight, and I finally, well, that's another story too, but I just was captured the next morning with, because I started having to do it in daylight. I couldn't get a message, was getting stale, and I had to get that message through fast, and I found out later that it was already, it was too late when I started out, but they didn't know that at the time, and no one did, but I kept going. But that next day, that's when I was captured to the 7th Armored, and then that started my fantastic story of POW.
So how long were you with the 107?
106.
107, or I mean with the armored division?
Oh, the armored, the 7th?
Yeah.
7th Armored. About 5 hours. No, that's when I finally got back to St. Vincent. I couldn't get in the city. It was surrounded. And it was really after, a lot of times it was under fire by artillery fire from the Germans. And so my thing was, but I got off the road and started in through the Ardennes woods. And the Ardennes pretty well stopped there before we got to, that was in where the division was lined up was the Ardennes forest, which is thicker than any forest in the United States you've ever seen. It was very moist ground, and as a result, those little seeds that had come down from the trees, instead of being swept up and thrown away in trash like we do, they're taking out sprouts. So there are hundreds of these little sprouts coming up, and to get through, you have to take your hand like this and fight your way through the forest, through the woods. And the tanks, German tanks came through by cutting down these first. They cut down the trees, and then the big bulldozers would cut down the little stuff, and the trees would let the trees fall in and kind of make a wooden road for the tanks to come through. And it comes out, they get stuff, and then the big bulldozer push them out. Now I never saw this. I know this is what happened, but the World War II is terribly interesting in so many ways, and I have been to a story at the Thurber Tower here on the man, and the fellow was telling about being in the infantry and a different division of mine, but his story could have been my story, because a lot of us were thrown together in military to the military to be taken away from the front and taken back into Poland, and I ended up in Poland in a prison camp, a German prison camp, a Polish prison camp, and a Russian prison camp. They took us far. The Germans took the Allied groups as far away from the front of the advancing France, because they wanted to keep us away from being able to fight again. And then when the Russian offensive began in that spring of 15, I guess it was. No, I'm all mixed up here about dates. But anyhow, I walked as a prisoner, I walked from St. Vith to the German border, and then after I was captured and came, they as a prisoner, they moved us from prison camp in Off-Flag 64Z, which was the off-flag. Stalag is enlisted men, off-flag is officers, and at that. And now that's another story. We get into the POW bit.
How were you captured on your own, or were you with the group when you were captured?
I was all by myself, going from the front to St. Vith, and when I got to St. Vith and found that I couldn't get into the city, and I was on the hills in the woods outside, a little bit beyond on the left side, and there was a group of Americans with a major telling them that they had a permission to surrender, that we're out of, etc., we're out of food, we're out of ammunition, or so forth, and we'll live to fight again. And I said, I'll be darned, I'm not going to surrender. They're going to have to shoot me or capture me, because I'm not going to give up. And the sergeant next to me heard that say, and I said, me too. So he and I took off then from that, and that's when I was no longer alone, and so we took off, but it was no time at all. Like, I don't even think it wasn't even the next morning. It was later that day that we were going through some woods and getting kind of cleared the door in the air. The edge of the woods. I thought, hey, we're doing fine. Well, there we were completely surrounded by Germans, and so we had to give up, the sergeant and I, and we were put back into St. Vith and the railroad cars, etc.
So what was it like being transported to Poland?
Well, I'll tell you, they put us in a 40-and-8 railroad car, which was from World War I, 40 men or 8 horses. Well, they put 150 of us, we were told, shoved us in the car, closed the door, and we were in the car for 8 days without the door being opened. We had a steel helmet on the floor that everybody used as a latrine. However, it was not really filled because we'd had no food. Before I was captured, I had had no food for 3 days other than canned ration and a chocolate bar, a D-ration. And what happened then, normally in our military, was you ate those during the day. Then at night, both the Germans and us would would stop fighting, wait for the light, and then the food truck would come up, and they would say, "Bring up the food, and another second lieutenant is dead." And that generally happened about every other week because, as I said, the lieutenants were trained from college, and they were not from the ranks. Occasionally that was not true, but at the officers' training school, and if you're a 90-day wonder, well, don't you tell me that, you'll have a fist in your nose. And the 90-day wonder was because we were selected from college to go to the infantry school for 90 days to learn how to make maps, how to read maps, how to read offense of the German offense, and how to plan a counterattack, things that were, and how to fire a mortar, which took mathematics, the angle of the mortar, the size of the load of the firing load, and so that took 2.5 years, 3.5 years for me of ROTC, of every classes 5 days a week, and so don't tell me I'm a 90-day wonder, but the fact is that in my class at ROTC, Columbus, Georgia, to be a second lieutenant, where it was the 90-day wonder business, there were 185 students, and 85 of them were were sergeants and corporals from the ranks, and every one of them flunked out because they did not have the years of training that we had, or the intelligence of the mathematics, or the years of training to plan an offense, deserved to understand a offense, plan the defense, and vice versa. So that was what I was proud of, and that's why I'm so proud of the Combat Infantry Badge, and proud of the United States Army and the United States of America, and why I have them on my car.
So you went to Fort Benning to do your basic training, right?
I went to Fort Benning for my basic training, and it was very similar to what I'd already had at Ohio University, but it fine-tuned it for me, and so that I came out, and the obstacle course, and I want to say this, that the United States of America, the greatest country in the world, without question, trained us so that we were fit to go into battle, and well-trained, and body that could stand 8 days in a boxcar with no food or water. because we had muscle, we had fat on us, just enough to keep us going if we didn't get sick. That's why I have a little fat right now, but my heart's good. The doctor says I'm going to be 100. I says, well, if I am, doctor, I'm going to be out of money, and I'm moving in with you. So he changed his diagnosis generally. So, but I am going to live and be 100, and I just met at a birthday party of a wonderful 85-year-old lady, and here was a friend. I came up to this gentleman, and I says, how good to see you. You're an inspiration to me. Now, you're 101 or 2, or how old are you? He says, I'm 107. So there I thought that was the oldest man in the world. But no, right here, people are getting older because of good food, good doctors, good medicines. And so, yes, I'm going to live to be 100. 100, how much farther than that, only no good Lord will know.
Did you, when you were sitting in that cattle car, did you expect to make 100, or what did you think?
I thought it's just a matter of time. They would have to open this up because they were the railroad car was only going to go so far because our wonderful Air Force had bombed every factory in Germany, Poland, and every factory in every railroad terminal, and the train was only going to go to the next town where there was going to be stopped. But and this is what happened. And so they took us out, and then we started walking. And but I ended up walking into Germany from the east.
So they marched you from St. Vith to where did they end up taking you? From
being captured in Germany,
right.
They took me west toward Germany, in central Germany, and when I was liberated, when I was walking back, well, now, wait, what was your question was, where did they take us? Well, the Germans took us back into Germany, and then into Poland, and down on to the Fire City, which I had a terrible time of remembering, and
Nuremberg?
No, but it's right next to Russia, and then they wanted to take us as far away from the advancing Allies as they could to keep us from being liberated, in other words. But we were right on the Russian border, and on February the 13th that year, the Russian offensive began. They would stop trying to go through the Germans. The Russians were attacking the Germans and pushing them back towards Berlin, and so we were in the way of the Russian advance. So they took us out of our camp, Flag Z, 44Z, 64Z, and the reason it was Z, 64 was the place for the war for all of the Allied officers, but it was so crowded, it was crowded as it was, and so they set up a girls' school, brick theater school, and set that up for an overflow, and they called it 64Z. But we were there a very short time, and when we came through those boxcars on the way, we stopped at the Auflag in Germany, southwest Germany, and stayed there overnight. And the next morning, we were given a mug, and I'll show you that mug. I use it every day for shaving. Would you like to see the mug? At the enlisted men's camp where I stayed overnight, they gave us a breakfast ration and this cup, which they filled full of water. And with that water, that was to last you all day. That was all the water you were going to get that day. The Russians didn't cut off our heads, they just tried to starve us to death. And so, what do you do with this? You can wash with it, you can shave with it, you can drink it. So what do you think we did? We drank it. And then on the bottom of it, there's a swastika and a 1940. So this is a real keepsake, and to remind me of our victory, and the fact I made it back home to Mom, and to my dear mother. And so I use that every day, and not every day do I think about it. I'm planning the day as it is, but I never forget my experience and how well trained we were by the U.S. Army, and how strong a body that has been fed well and trained well can get through. Plus the fact, another thing that I think is very important in military is the independence we have as a democracy compared to Germany, who follow a leader. If our lieutenant or captain was killed, or our sergeant was killed or incapacitated or wounded, the corporal would take over, and so that there was a chain of command and ability. And if that corporal, next there'd be a private they're leaders of every group, and so they would show up, and we'd keep fighting, where the Germans were stopped because they didn't have that independence. They were used to being told what to do. And that won the war. Among everything else was one of the causes. Don't want to take, just know, we'd say that for every soldier or a soldier that was shooting a gun or doing a thing, there were 10 people making it possible for him to be there. And that included the quartermaster, the making the clothes, the people making the clothes, Rosie River making the tanks, etc. And it was, so we never want to, don't be selfish. Don't get in your mind that you're the hot shot, because you're not, you're just one of many. E pluribus unum. See how smart I am? My foot.
I saw something, you showed me some medals earlier, and one of the things I saw was a Christmas dinner list.
Yes.
Well, where did you make that at?
In prison camp. We had food, as they say. We got the cup full of water, and we got food, and you take 2 fingers like that, and from the top of this down to this knuckle, and as thin as the ring, and well, maybe a little thin as this ring here, my mother's ring, this gold ring, a little thicker than the 2 rings together, would be the thickness of it, and that would be a little piece of meat, and a little piece of cheese, generally a little piece of cheese and a little piece of meat, and that was your food for the day, and just enough to, and a teaspoonful of sugar. And I thought, well, that sure tastes good, but that's funny. So when I got back, I asked my doctor about that, and he says, well, that's to stimulate your amino acids in your body to make you starve faster. Those damn Germans. And so they did cut off our heads like the Japs did. And I just, this week, have tried to determine, well, I just took it off in the other coat, VE Day and VJ Day, and why I'm wearing my uniform to church and on Sunday in celebration of those days, and Armed Services Day, which was like our armistice in World War I, and so my love for my country is so evident, and everybody says, well, Twink always has the American flag on his lapel, and he generally is wearing a jacket because he thinks he's a gentleman, and I am, and I try to be, and I like to dress up. I have not too many clothes, but I have 7 sport coats and 4 suits, so why not wear it? I enjoy it, and now I'm getting rid of clothes since I in a smaller apartment. But it's my car. I have a red and blue stripe from bumper to bumper over the driver's side, and American flag over the driver's side, and POW on the passenger side. And so they say, well, you're very patriotic. I says, yes, but it also helps me find my car in the crowd. But no, I go out, and instead of having to use the honker in the parking lot, and most of the people are younger than I am out here anymore. There are even some 50-year-olds here, but mostly 70 and 80s, and a few of us are 90. Some of the women particularly, they outlive us men, but I can find my car.
So, when the Russians had you, what did you, and you knew that the English were coming, how did you feel?
Well, I felt that I gave the Russians name, rank, and serial number, just like they were an enemy. And they, when the Germans marched us away from the Russians back through Poland into Germany, at the edge of German, we stopped in a small little town with 600 people, supposedly, I found out later, named Wugarten, W-O-G-E-N, Wugarten, G-A-R-T-E-N. No, W is a V in German, Wugarten. And the Russians came, and the Russians were coming. So as soon as we got in that little town, walking back from off Flag 64, the German guards left us. They were older men, and they knew that the war was over, and they lost, and they didn't want to be captured by the Russians because they heard stories about how bad they were, and they wanted to be captured by the Americans or the British. So they were going back, headed back east, and to the Allied soldiers, and so we likewise expected our Russians to take us, but they were 35 of us officers, and they kept us in that little town of Wugarten for 5 weeks before they took us out. And eventually we walked up to the railroad line and got on the, what happened was 35 Studebaker trucks came to pick us up, to take us to Ukraine and down to Odessa to ships to liberate us. And so that's happened. And I sat in the back of that pickup truck and went through a town in Germany, one of the major towns west and a little south of Berlin. I didn't go Berlin, but I went through that town, and there was not a single house or building that didn't have a wall gone or a hole in the roof. Had it been, and you can imagine, we brought the war to the civilians, and the civilians finally got rid of Hitler. But we were welcomed even by Germans who were happy that they had gotten rid of Hitler. We had gotten rid of Hitler for them. And the Fire City, wish you could think of the name of it, but there was the place where Stalin and Hitler were going to meet to divide up Europe because they thought they were going to win that at that time, I guess. And it was the only place that hadn't been bombed. It was a beautiful city, and so the Americans heard of this, and so they firebombed that city and burned it down, so that Hitler and Stalin wouldn't have a comfortable place to do it, which is an interesting story in itself too. If you're really interested in World War II, there are wonderful books out and many details. And I, I could write some of those books that I read, I could write them myself. And there are little ones and big ones. And
Once you got back to the Allies, after the Russians
Yes.
finally released you, what was the process of kind of getting back from
the
there?
process was to get you home. And with us, with me, I ended up in Ukraine, at Odessa on the Black Sea, and Odessa is famous for steps, many steps coming down the side of the hill to the city, to the street, main street town, and town street, and those steps are kind of a significant place. But there was a place, and what happened was the ship that was there to take prisoners home was a British ship, and they had so we boarded it instead of American ship because it was there and the American ship wasn't there yet. So we ended up back in England, and the thing that was interesting too was they were prepared to give lessons to the English people, soldiers, as to what they had lost since VE Day, and they were a little disappointed that they got Americans, so they weren't going to give us the history. But we said, yes, let's do. We'd like to hear it too. You're our ally. We love, a lot of us are from Germany, our heritage. Mine is from England, I mean. My heritage is from England, from Kent, England, and my 13th great-grandfather, Comfort Starr, emigrated to America, and he joined up with a gentleman, an Englishman who had just come into inheritance. This was at the time the war was being ended, and he had his inheritance of 1,500 pounds, which is a lot of money, and my plan bought 1,000 acres of New Haven, Connecticut, from Miles Standish, the counter, and whose sweetheart was Tecumseh, believe it or not. And we bought 1,000 acres from the Indians, and John, my 13th great grandfather, Comfort Starr, and the guy from England founded Harvard College, and their son, Comfort Starr, is one of the 5 trustees of the college, because it's a corporate. Harvard is a corporation, not like a state or county, like state or high U, but it's a private school, and the corporation founded it. With so I'm on record there of the archives, and I went to see it one time, and I was a Sunday afternoon, and I thought this is in the library at Harvard, and I thought the students would be there studying, but it was closed, so I didn't get to go and see the actual signatures, but they're there. But I've been proud of the fact that not only have I been interviewed today, but I've been interviewed for Washington for the museum there, and I'm in their collection, so I'm very proud of that. Very proud of my cousin, who was the colonel that was at the World War II Memorial. And so I didn't make Captain Starr. I made first lieutenant, and I could have stayed, if I had stayed on, I'd have got my captaincy, but hell, I want to come home to Mama. Come home to my dear mother, who raised 3 boys, 16, 15, and 10, put us all through high school and college. So that's kind of my World War II story, except the fact that when I came back, I was speaker at many Kiwanis meetings and Rotary meetings and schools, and yet today the Upper Arlington Hastings Junior High School gives about 4 of us on Veterans Day a chance to say a few words, and we hear a speaker speak. And this was the 8th year for me, and I think maybe the 18th, I'm not sure. But I know I thoroughly enjoy it because the kids are so wonderful, the boys and girls. And in class, their professor has them, teacher has them questions that they'll ask. And then they ask those questions. Then they go back to school and they compare all these around and get similarities and write up another story. So that's what wonderful teachers we have. And I think that is all over our country as good schools, and democracy is the way to live.
Was there a moment you were, what was the most frightened you were when you were over in?
The most frightened I was when I got back to the American lines, and I suddenly realized that I hadn't been killed, and here all of a sudden I couldn't go through the lines at St. Fifth in the dark because they would shoot without question, anybody moving. At night, you did not move, you stayed in your foxhole. Anybody that moved was suspect. And so you stayed there. And as I told you, when I was moving at night, I got in the foxhole with a German. And fortunately, he didn't have a pistol, he had a rifle, and whatever. But anyhow, he was scared, and he hunkered down while I was in that foxhole long enough for him to have to get out of it, because he heard me go through the woods, through the forest there, and left. But the most scared thing was coming back, and I married the American lines at St. Fifth at the 7th Armored at night. And as a result, I had to wait till morning, and as soon as the twilight started coming, it was just light, no sun yet, so forth, but we could see. But it was dusty, and the light was shining in the eyes of the Germans, of the Americans, I think, when we were coming through. But anyhow, they opened fire on us, riflemen, and one squad, and it was me, and not 2 of us, just me. And so I got back in the fox in the woods real quick, hid behind a tree, and then when it got lighter, I came out, but they fired at us again and missed. But I stumbled, and that's how I got missed, I guess, during the daylight. I stumbled on the grass and fell down, and then I raised my hands and started yelling, "Don't shoot, I'm American." And I got together with that squad, and the squad leader says, "I gave those guys hell for missing." And I says, "I love those guys." They missed. But no, I would say during the if you're 21 like we were, you feel like you're immortal, and those bullets aren't going to hit you, and that's what they want in a lieutenant, or they want a soldier. They want young kids. It is the young 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, the ones that fight wars, and those are some of the reasons. But that was a frightening thing, because they basically were shooting point blank at us, but they were nervous too, because these were Germans and they thought we were armed and they were going to be shot. And so you do try shooting a rifle and trying to hold it, you've got to hold it still and aim carefully for a moving target particularly. And so that's why I wasn't killed by the Americans. But before the shooting that I was shot through was more artillery and aircraft, and my mission was not to kill Germans. My mission was to take messages. And your mission is overpowering. you, I had stories of for instance, the flamethrower with the Tiger tank is an example of of being able to shoot soldiers one at a time, bang, bang. Most of the time, you're shot into, you shoot into the forest, because they're hid. In our case, we weren't in the plains, so forth. We weren't in the open grasslands, but being captured, I do have on my uniform the campaign ribbons for all three of the campaigns, or four it is, and those were awarded to us prisoners because we would have gone on and continued to fight. I always was kind of reluctant to say I had those clusters, but then I found out that no, I am proud of it because that shows I was a POW, if not in there. But there's one for Africa, for example, when they invaded Africa, and the one for Italy, and so forth. So there's those campaigns. But on my uniform now, I have, instead of just I have an actual badge hanging, a miniature of the actual ribbon that says World War I. And now my uniform really looks complete. And the one on that you took a picture of it in the bedroom are a replica of what's on my uniform. And so it's but I am very the World War II was a major factor of my life, and I still can't get over it. I don't want to.
When you were, what were your plans for when you got back from?
What?
What were your plans for?
Oh, my plans were to hug my mother and have a big turkey dinner, a big Thanksgiving dinner, and a Christmas dinner, and a big dinner to eat a lot. That's where the menu got together there. But no, to finish my college education and to do the best I could. And at that time, I thought I could marry, and I found out later that I went into college, and I saved. I've been very personal about this. Unlike today, I was a virgin until I was 28, and when I was in college, I had opportunities, and I didn't because I didn't want to. I saved to myself. I wanted to be a virgin. I wanted a virgin wife back in the 20s. That was the thought, and so when I got in the military, I did the same, and I could have lost my virginity then, but I didn't. And the nice thing it was, because I wanted to, I realized that I wasn't getting fit to do it. I couldn't get an erection, in other words, and I was saving myself for my virgin wife. And then you've heard the rest of the story about the psychiatrist said, get out and have fun. You're born this way. You're one among many, but the Constitution says you're equal. Bible says you're equal. So enjoy yourself, be proud of yourself. And I've tried to pass that on to these speeches that I've made. This mosaic is a group of, it's a tile, they're all different colors, all different sizes, which are what these kids are. And so what I say is, why are you 90? And I say without a compliment or a complaint. And I say the compliment is I've been told by others that I've been an inspiration to these younger kids, and both physically and mentally, and to keep it up, keep going. And so that's kept me. I'm going to live to be 107, maybe 8, 9.
So, being you didn't really, did you realize you were different?
I did. Well, first of all, I had asthma as a kid, and I couldn't play basketball. But I remember having to sit up during the night in order to breathe. And then I had a wonderful liquid that mother would give me in a teaspoon, and or I'd take it myself. I was not that young, but that would clear my chest. And now, just like I did earlier before I came, I started coughing. I take now a breathalyzer in the morning, two kinds, and I can't think of the name right now, but you would know. I just said to it earlier, I think maybe, but that opens up the little sacs in your chest that holds oxygen from your blood, takes blood from your oxygen from your blood, and that's where your heart pumps the blood and is taken up by your arteries and my lungs, and so that I can breathe without coughing. But sometimes if I have to cough, and that's why I left you there, went back and got that.
But you didn't realize you were gay until
I was 28.
28. You didn't think.
No, didn't know the difference.
Mm.
I thought I was going to be just like my father and mother.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had an interior decorator, and I'd heard that interior decorators were gay, and so he was my first. He was my first conquest, if you want to say but that's the first one I first lost my virginity, and then I met Alan, who was an interior decorator, and I figured he was so good looking, and when my friend that I was getting some draperies from, that's why I met him for my apartment, and at the college hangout downtown on High Street, this handsome guy was sitting at the bar, and I wondered if he were gay, and in walked my conquest, and went up and talked to him, so I knew he was. So the fellow beside Alan left, so I left where my table where I was sitting, went up and sat next to him, introduced myself, and eventually asked him to go home with me, and he did. And he always said, well, I was going to go home with the fellow on my right, but I found out he had a wooden leg, so I took you. I says, thanks a lot. But no, I came out knowing, but because I'd gone to a psychiatrist. I was intelligent enough to know that. He was smart enough to be one that didn't tell me I could get convinced, I could get changed. He's the one to tell me, get the hell out of my office, go have fun, meet someone like yourself. Well, Alan was the one I met. Thomas Allen Wingfield, T. Allen, his little brother at college called him. And we had a lot in common. He was a decorator. I was great in art. You can look at all the art around my thing. I sold art. Emerson Burkhart. I sold to the Art Museum, Columbus Art Museum, and my clothes from the 50s, my sport coats, Gucci's, Burberry from England, and so forth, start the men's collection at Ohio State. And I'm just invited up there next week, I think it is, or the week after, to be in the anniversary of the collection at Ohio State. And it's an honor to feel that your good taste and your economic ability at the time to buy those clothes and to be able to pass them on. I thought the shells missed me. I know that other soldiers were having arms blown off and legs blown off and from the shrapnel, and that's why after the war you saw a lot of people with one leg off or part of a leg off, whatever, that came back to the military, that is. And so I was very fortunate, and I said I was good at dodging the bullets, I guess, and the shrapnel. But a lot of my friends didn't come back. It's interesting. I have had the pleasure of going back to Japan and to Bataan and Corregidor. And Corregidor, you know, that was the Philippines, and there's where MacArthur says, "I shall return." That was a famous World War thing. And I have been through there. I've been back to Normandy Beach. I've been to the Auschwitz. I've been to Dachau. I've been to Russia, Germany, Poland, and those places. I've gone back to all those World War II memories. And it's emotional to go back and to see Normandy Beach. By all means, I encourage everyone to get out the books, realize the service. And I tell these high school kids, war's hell. It isn't glamorous.